Welcome to Passion and Purpose with Pamela, celebrating all things woman. I'm Dr. Pamela Hardy Shepherd, here to ignite inspiration through conversations that spotlight women's power and their journeys. Let's share our light, our stories, and create a space of celebration for every woman. Here's to embracing our womanhood together. Welcome to Passion and Purpose with Pamela. Today we have the pleasure of introducing Felicia Zimmerman, a remarkable individual whose journey spans continents and industries. Born and raised in Connecticut, Felicia holds a BA from Smith College and an MA from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Felicia's career began in the corporate world, where she spent a decade with industry giants like Citibank and PepsiCo. But in 1987, she took a bold step and launched her own consulting business, advising major corporations across the US, Europe, and Asia. Her clients included prominent names like EDS, Halliburton, Mobil, ExxonMobil, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. In 2012, Felicia's path led her to China, where she advised the management team of China Petroleum, represented American and Israeli tech startups, and taught business communications. In her return to the U.S., she also got involved in gubernatorial campaign and advising international startups. Currently, Felicia volunteers at the Michael E. D. Becky VA Medical Center, where she dedicates her time to raising donations for the homeless veterans. She is also an author of Reinvent Your Work, a book that profiles leaders who have reshaped their businesses and careers. Felicia's journey is a testament to resilience and intuition, and we're excited to dive into her story today. Welcome, Felicia. So, Felicia, we are so excited that you are here. I just introduced you, and I was wondering if you could tell the listeners a little bit about yourself in your own words.
Well, I think as I thought about our conversation, Pamela, and I thought, what would people find interesting and relevant? You know, so many times you hear a motivational speaker, but you can't really identify with the suggestions they're giving. I would say for my whole life, both personal and professional, probably the most important lesson I've learned, sometimes the hard way, is get to know yourself. And once you get to know yourself, figure out what you're going to do with that. Once you figure out a good something, then go at it, really with all your energy, passion, and commitment. So I would say those probably three themes weave themselves through everything that I've done.
So let me ask you a question. How did you get to know yourself? What did you do to help you to get to know yourself?
Well, actually, I did it through the back door,
Oh,
in the sense that I remember numerous experiences where I worked for someone before I went out on my own. It wasn't fashionable in 1986 to go start a business. You work for someone. But so for 10 years, I worked for different places. And I think what I gathered, first of all, is how other people saw me. So one of the last jobs that I had before I went out, I'll keep the company names, I don't need to mention them now, but I think one of the last assignments I had as an extra role at the company, they wanted me to teach sales training to the people that were VP and above. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. Why me? I don't run a firm that does that. Of course, I wasn't going to be paid for it either. But that is an example. Someone saw something in me of working with executives that I didn't think of in myself. So I think part of it was other people seeing other things in me. And I think a key driver, Pamela, for me was I just never felt really happy or content working as an employee for someone else. So bringing those two strains together were very, very critical for me.
Well, and that's a powerful thing that you say, because a lot of people aren't happy working for someone else, but they continue to do it. And how did you get off the treadmill? Because it's like, I got to go to work, I got to pay my bills. These are the things I got to do, but we stay on that treadmill and we won't venture out. So, how did you get off the treadmill?
Well, this additional role at the company was a wake-up call. My second to the last boss at the company was the only boss that I ever worked for that I thought was great. When he met me, he said, Felicia, you're so smart that I just give you everything. And I know you'll be here nights, weekends, you'll get everything done. So, there were people that saw it, but I think what ultimately happened is, in a sense, there was a little bit of rebellion
Mm.
because my mother and my late father, my mother was a depression kid, and she always wanted me to go to law school, which I had no interest in whatsoever. And she knew I was miserable at the third company I was working at, but she said, you don't give up a good job. In other words, depression mentality. So
Yes.
that kind of pushed me. And I thought, you know, I'm going to go. But I remember I had a friend at work who was carrying my pencil case and all sorts of stuff to my car. He said, you just got promoted. I can't believe you're doing this, which was more of, you don't give up a good job type of thing. But I felt, Pamela, that what I'd shown to myself through these other people, that I was good at dealing with higher levels and coaching them, helping them solve problems, whatever. So I thought, I'll give it a try. And I was renting an apartment. If it doesn't work, I'll go back somewhere.
Wow.
But
Wow.
once I got out, I had only been out on my own. Let's say I went out in December of 1986. I had my first client, an oil company, in February of 87. And I called a person who I had a contact with, who's someone else, 40 times on the phone till I got him. That's part of the persistence. I'm
Ah.
sort of like that gnat. You say, get out of here. But I remember in the first few days of being out on my own, I thought to myself, this is fabulous. And I'm getting paid for it too.
Wow.
So, but it's just, to me, I maybe I'm not that smart. I didn't look out saying, oh, I'll make X millions by this date or what. I just thought, let me give it a try. I guess I always undervalue myself. And in a way, sometimes that has some benefits.
Yes. I think about what you're saying, and depending on when you were raised, and we're in the same age group. And I think that, coming up as a baby boomer, excuse me, there were certain things that was expected of us. It was like, go to high school and get a good paying job, and it wasn't become an entrepreneur.
Oh,
And
no.
I think I only seen two entrepreneurs, but I really wasn't close to them, so it wasn't something that I was learning. One was my uncle who had a grocery store, and the other was my best friend's father who owned a barbershop. Those are the only two entrepreneurs I ever seen, and they were both men. So wasn't seeing women in that place. Everybody else, like my mother was a nurse, and everybody else, worked somewhere. So when you step out and you do something that is different, um, I don't know for you, but it is a risk, but it's also, you have a little bit of excitement and a little bit of fear, like, am I doing the right thing? Um, I mean, what did that feel like emotionally? I know you said it was almost like being free, but can you give us a snapshot of what your emotions were doing at that time?
Well, the first number of years, I would say every day to myself, I need to be realistic. I need to be realistic. Okay. And I think that was a subliminal reaction to how I'd been raised. I dearly loved my parents and I miss my mom every day. But theirs was you follow a conventional path. There were only two routes: law school or medical school.
Mhm.
And she put a little gavel on my charm bracelet when I was a little girl. And I sure as heck was not going to do that. But I think the feeling like I have to be realistic. How do I continue this? It was sort of that. I wouldn't call it fear, but that's was the motivation. I was always hungry in
Mhm.
the sense for new challenge. And I could talk a little bit how the business evolved, but at the very beginning, I was, when you say entrepreneur, I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I just thought of myself, and maybe this is something we do as women, because we think the entrepreneurs are the guys in Silicon Valley, okay? The guys, all right? And if you're a little woman somewhere, whether you're big or little like me, you just have some little business. You're not really an entrepreneur.
Yes.
The reality is you are, but it took a long time. And again, getting the sense from other people that, wow, you helped me tremendously. I mean, there's one company, one of the largest oil companies in the world, that'll give
Mhm.
you a clue, actually emerged with another. So, I mean, but it was very large. At the time I worked with them, I think it was 60 billion. And
Mm.
it was to be my second assignment with that company. And I was told that the head of an entire, I won't say the name of the organization, incredibly critical to oil and gas exploration, had to go in front of the CEO and top management and justify the continued existence of his function. Why? Because a famous consulting firm, who also shall go unnamed, that they'd paid millions of dollars to, said, get rid of them. So I worked for 3 weeks with this gentleman and his two people, and we developed a pitch, the PowerPoints. And I said to him, at the beginning, he was very skeptical when I walked in. There I walk in,
Oh,
100
okay.
pounds, 5'1". He is from Arkansas. And he looked at me and he said, it's like, this is what they're sending in? You got to be kidding. His life is on the line. Little did we both know. I said to him after working with him, I said, I figured I'd take a risk. I mean, my confidence was growing. And this was only 1991. And I said to him, as soon as I saw how he looked at me, I said, so and so, I can tell by how we're
Yes.
interacting that you really don't think I can help you. And you know what? You may be right. Well, why don't you give me about 10 minutes? And if there's anything that I say that rings a bell and you think can help, I'm all in for you. Well, I said to him during the course of this 10 minutes, I said, you've got 40 seconds before your CEO shoots you.
Mhm.
I said, you have this whole study by famous consulting firm. I almost said their name. And they're saying you don't know what you're doing. You're not cost efficient. You don't use technology well, and so on and so forth. We need to, instead of fighting this and trashing them, which isn't going to work,
That's right.
especially after the CEO spent millions, we need to come up with a 20-second answer up front that says, while
Mhm.
this study says this, and this, we've taken a hard look at ourselves, and based on that, we refocused our business. And what I used graphically was I used a picture of an oil field out of focus, and then we
Mm.
brought it into focus. After that, and this is where, in terms of my evolution with this $60 billion company, he introduced me to the whole department and he said, "This is the woman that saved our function."
Yeah.
And he said, "I never want this to happen again." So every year, twice a year, he would bring people from his team from Africa, from Asia, North America, everywhere for my 6-person, boot camp training program, which was only a day and a half. But I became known as the Barracuda. And what was great about that is it led to other things. But I would say that particular experience was one of the most powerful because I'll be honest with you, Pamela, when I got thrown into it, I didn't know. But at the end of it, I literally lived at that company. I would eat a pretzel out of one of those large pretzels out of the vending machine. I lost so much weight in 3 weeks that the human resource guy said, "Felicia, are you on a diet?" I said, "No." He says, "You're not eating. You never go home." I said, "Well, I said, there's plenty of time for sleep later."
I love it. I mean, that story is incredible because also what I heard is you were thrown into a situation, and at that time you didn't even know your own strengths. I mean, we have a sense of some of our weaknesses and some of our strengths, but a talent, a gift, to be able to say, "Give me 40." Did you say 40 seconds or 40 minutes?
40 seconds.
40
That
seconds. I mean,
he had 40 seconds. He
yeah,
had 40 seconds to survive. But what's interesting, Pamela, is the year before that was my first year of working with this company. And the person whom I helped was his boss, who is the head of all technology for this $60 billion corporation. He was an engineer, and I had to put together his pitch to the CEO. But even though it went well, and it went so well that he ended up doing it for the board of directors as well. But I figured, a lot of people can do that.
no. I'm going to tell you, no, they can't. It takes a visionary.
And so, but it still is, I think, and this is something that can be helpful, I think, for people listening. Sometimes we don't know. I said, yes, get to know yourself. Well, sometimes you do it through the back door. It's other people knowing you and valuing you and seeing your strengths that push you into that, literally.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for me, I think a lot of the people that I saw at the companies had too much confidence for the talent they had. And I didn't ever want to be like that.
Can you explain that a little bit? Too much confidence for the talent. I want to make sure I'm understanding. Can you?
Well, there were people, there was a woman I knew at one company who was in a big hurry to get someplace like the top. And she really didn't care how good the work she was doing or learning basic things. She just wanted to get there. And I remember she called me once from London. We were on the phone for 3 hours, and I knew her boss. This was at a multi-billion-dollar tech company. And I said to her, I've got to be honest with you. I don't think you should say that. I don't think you should do it. Here's why. She ended up leaving, going to another company, and taking some of the stuff she was doing at this technology company, not taking it, but taking some of their concepts, not their proprietary, and walking into this little company like it was a multi-billion-dollar company. And it wasn't appropriate. She was fired. They pushed her out. She went somewhere else. They pushed her out. She finally went to one last place, and they pushed her out. And she had invited me that day to speak to her team. When she walked into the room, I looked at her face and it said, "I have seen Jesus." But after that, that lesson didn't last. She started her own business, and she was showing me whatever. And I said, I may be small-minded, but how are you going to get 20% of the market right away or 10%? I just never thought that way. And maybe that's too small-minded, but to me, uh, she was from a practical point of view living in La La Land. And I don't mean California.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You're giving so many great examples. And I know that I did mention some of the companies that you did work for, but I just want to go back before we go forward. You were born
Sure.
and raised in Connecticut. And is there anything being born and raised in Connecticut that you can attribute outside of your parents to who you are as an individual?
Well, not exactly in the sense that when I grew up, which is the 1950s, um, Connecticut, old New England was pretty conservative.
Mhm.
Um, I wouldn't say it was so much Connecticut as it was probably my family, because I knew my family expected, especially my mother and father, expected a lot from me. And that was getting into a great college, and it wasn't really so much Connecticut. I would say it was probably more my family. Um, I think when I moved back to Texas, I'd had enough. I went back to Connecticut before my mom died. And then I lived in China and I came home for some medical appointment. And I just ended up keep slipping on the ice. So I said I'd had
Mhm.
enough of the weather.
Yes, for
But
sure.
I think really a big influence more was my mother and father. Um, my mother, my dad loved because he put himself through Yale and Harvard. Um, he played with a jazz band, the accordion and piano,
Oh
and
my
he put
goodness.
himself through Yale undergraduate and Harvard Dental School. And my mother was an attorney, and they worked really hard. And my dad absolutely loved that I would wake up at 6:30 or something in the morning every morning and practice the piano. My mother said, I could do that, and it's kind of noisy. But my dad and my mom loved it. I mean, I was close to both of them.
I
But
love
I think that the biggest inspiration from them is be practical.
it. Hmm.
My mom was very analytical,
Hmm.
very highly analytical. My father was more of the extrovert. My mother was more of an introvert. I got a little bit, I mean, more than Connecticut, I think I got a little of the extrovert from my dad and the analytical piece from my mom.
Your mom. I love that. I asked you that question because I understand how powerful families are and what you learn. And originally, I'm from Iowa, and I actually attribute a lot of things growing up in the Midwest to who I am as an individual and what it did give me. Because, after moving from Iowa to California and living there for 46 years, it was a culture shock.
Oh,
I thought
yeah.
the Vincent Thomas Bridge was the Golden Gate Bridge because I had never seen a bridge so big in my life. And that's why I asked that question. But I do love the fact and understand it is family, culture, family, your relationships and expectations that really clearly help you to be who you are. And okay, so I want to go back forward and for you to tell us now in 1987 you worked at those big billion-dollar companies, and then in
Well,
2012
they were my clients.
they
I
were your
didn't, I
clients.
worked, I worked, did work for them.
Okay,
Yeah.
those were consulting. And so then in 2012, you went to China. So I definitely want to capture that and tell us a little bit about that and how did you make that leap?
Again, this is sort of listening to the wind or the tea leaves. Um, in 2000, around 6, my mom, I would be calling her every day. She was almost 90. She was by herself. And although I lived the farthest away, she was not doing well, but she was never, I got this from her, she was never the kind that would say, I need help, but I could hear it. So I tried to hire a few people. I would pay them in advance to go take her to a doctor's appointment. They'd take the money and then they wouldn't show. I saw some of these services where they came, they were, I won't go into it, awful, inhumane. So I thought, she was there for you. She's had a tough life. And I need to go back a step and say that I thought that the economy was changing as well. But I thought to myself, you need to stop this of trying to call every day. You're worried about her, and you know how you'll feel if she dies alone. So I said to her, I'm moving up to Connecticut. She was thrilled. And I was up there and I knew I wasn't going to be able to go back and forth to Texas, but I wasn't sure what I would do next. I had only been there maybe a few weeks. I get a phone call from a woman who worked at the big multi-billion-dollar technology company. And she said, Felicia, I know you don't do this, but as a favor to me, my son's at MIT, Sloan School, getting his master's or MBA, whatever. He really needs some counseling, like he's thinking maybe to go into consulting or whatever. Would you talk to him? I said, of course. That led me to go to this famous company's website, the one that did work for the multi-billion-dollar oil company. It's very famous, begins with an MC. That gives you an idea. And I started reading, and everything was China, China, China. And I thought, Felicia, you've been in a very mature market. This one is coming up. You need to think eventually to prepare yourself to go there. Then there was a little negative sort on my left shoulder who said, but you don't speak Chinese. You know nothing about Chinese culture. You don't know anyone. Luckily, there was someone that had already been an entrepreneur for years that said, are you too old to learn? Well, what that set in place, which was unique about Connecticut, at the time, United Technologies had not merged. So it was a huge, probably the largest company in Connecticut. And Yale University both had scads of Chinese people. So I hired a woman who taught at Yale, and she was my Chinese teacher. And then I went every single weekend. I was at some Chinese event or person's house. I served on the board of, I forget what it was called, some Chinese American organization. I was the only non-Chinese. So eventually, when I got ready to go to China, when my mom had passed, I mean, I made a few trips, but it was very difficult leaving her home. Very difficult. I would pay 4 people to do what I did, and still I would worry. But by the time I got to China, I had a lot of connections. I had already taught. One of the things that I did when I went on one trip to China before I moved there is I did sort of a tour of traveling with like 2 friends that I'd met at Yale and we traveled around to different universities and I would speak. And the questions I would get about America and, just were mind-boggling. But I went into this university, Renmin University Business School, and I gave a speech. Afterwards, this tiny little woman, I should say tiny, she's probably my size, she comes up. I thought she was a student. So I was kind of ignoring her at first because I was trying to answer the questions. And she said, we would love to have you take over this program. I said, but I'm not a professor. She said, that's good. I said, but I don't live in China. That's okay. Whatever you know you're coming, let us know.
Wow.
I mean, they ultimately, when I taught there, I remember one class, I had 55 students from ultimately it was like 10 different nations.
Oh my
I
goodness.
mean, everyone in the about 5, 10 years ago was, going to China. So what I think one of the key lessons for me, and maybe for all Westerners going to China, is you need to have Hangyo, which means friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened is I remember I was giving a speech at another school, and the woman that invited me, who was a friend of friends from Yale, of course, or United Technologies, she said to me, they want to see you in the corporate relations office. So I went in there, and the guy's English wasn't great, but he said something the equivalent that senior management at a big oil company wanted me to talk about something ridiculous like shoes or something. I mean, it didn't even make any sense. But I understood what he was doing
Mm-hmm.
was getting me in there. So as soon as I walked in, I said to them, um, I was in front of the senior management, and I said in Chinese as much as I could that although I've been told you want me to talk about shoes or whatever it was, what's your real interest? They were prepared. They turn on the projector and up come all these emails. They were trying to do partnering on different projects with, I believe it was Chevron and BP.
Wow.
And here I am, an American who speaks some Chinese. I understand the culture. I've worked in the energy industry, and I've been referred by friends.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my.
so that was the second. The third thing that I did is, one of the things that I'd love to talk about is the resilience, the agility issue, because for me that's been key. But ultimately, I think around 2013, 2014, I thought, I need to make a change. I was in China, and I thought, if the American companies are too wary of dealing with the
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, and they increasingly were, who is desperate for money,
Mm-hmm.
and who's got great technology? So that's easy, Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So I found there was a big investment firm. I wrote their CEO, and then I was invited. They had the annual innovation conference in Tel Aviv, and they had, it was like 115 little Israeli startups. I mean, the technology there is amazing. And lo and behold, there were approximately 200 or 400 Chinese government officials there from 2 different cities. And I had a little sign on, a little badge that said my name in Chinese, Sima Lisha. Sima being Zimmerman, Lisha is like Felicia. So immediately the Israelis are grabbing one arm and the Chinese the other so that they can talk to each other. And then after that, the head of the investment firm invites me back. Unfortunately, this was
Wow.
just before another war started, and he
Mm-hmm.
was in the army. I forget which conflict it was, but there are ones there constantly. And he said, I want you to represent some of the little firms that we're financing in China. They're Israeli companies, but we want financing in China. I said, and here's me again, lacking confidence or thinking I'll have to work really hard. I don't measure up. I said, but I'm not an investment banker. He looked at me. He was a French Israeli. He said, bingo. In other words, he
Yeah.
said, I've got all those guys working for me. He said, but I need people that have the right human and
Mm-hmm.
sales skills to go. And so, that's a whole other story. But one of the students in my class at Renmin University, her husband was an aide to an executive at ZTE, which in China is a competitor of Huawei.
Oh
You've
my
heard of
goodness.
Huawei.
Yes.
So I was able to call her. She and I were friends, and she got an answer from me. It was a no, but I got an answer in 2 weeks, which in China is unheard of.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then, so it was great experience. I would say the hardest part of being in China, probably the best part, are the people. Lao Bai Xing, everyday people, great. Probably the hardest part was the air pollution. I mean, it's devastating. But the experience was great. I wasn't there that long. But I don't know that I have a bucket list, but if I did, that would have been on it.
Wow. And I'm listening to you, and I am just so excited and enamored by the things that you were saying, because the one thing that people don't really realize, you basically talked about networking and the importance of knowing somebody who knows somebody. And if you could expound on that, I'd really love it, because as women, we need to really network with one another. And your stories exemplify that. They really do, of what has happened to you and how it has happened. So could you talk about that just a little bit?
The thing is, in many ways, I think networking has gotten a dirty name, bad name, because people think networking is, oh, I'll go to this event, give them my card, and we're friends. That's it.
No.
What I especially saw in China is you don't have deep relationship unless you really are bringing something to the party. And what I saw with this Chinese association, which mostly had Yale scientists on it, is they loved when they had their annual conference. I raised all the money for it, and they loved it. But it wasn't. I think my philosophy has been, forget networking, which can be intimidating. Networking, as it's commonly known, because you think you got to go to some big event and just, there's a power of one. If you meet one person who's the right person, I got into the first client, which was Maxis Energy, later Diamond Shamrock. You've heard of that, and later is now Valero Energy. But there was somebody, when I first moved to Texas, this was back in 1982, 83, that thought that I should go into politics and be a lobbyist. And they introduced me to somebody who was in the Texas House of Representatives. He gave me a contact at a company who I went and spoke to. And then that person knew the person I eventually called 40 times to get in. So, my advice to a lot of people is, if the concept of networking is intimidating, start with one or two people and really build a relationship. Because, I think one of the things that I learned in China is you don't get anything easily. And they're very suspect, especially of foreigners. And I understand. But I think kind of narrow scope. I know if I go to a large event, I don't just go thinking, whom am I, I kind of try to think, who might want to meet. And sometimes I'll go as far as looking at the check-in to see who's checked in, if that person is there. So I think for me, I've probably over the years taken a contrary approach to what a lot of people advocate. I find just going to big events and making happy talk with gazillions of people, it doesn't work for me.
And it really doesn't work anymore. I mean, because when you were explaining about networking and going to events, and I think about how everybody used to have a card, and then it was like, oh, here, and that's really not, networking like I understand it to be. And I understand it to be the way you described it, as relationship building. And you build relationships with people. And so back in the day, way back in the day, I'd have a business card and I'd write on the back, okay, this person has 3 kids, they have a husband, that I would remember when their birthday was and all these, because you're building a relationship with them. And in today's technology where you can just throw an email together and you're on LinkedIn and all these different things, you have to find a way to create relationships with people, meet them where they are, what is important to them. And you've given a great example of that. It is so powerful that you say that. And I love when you said,
One of the things that scares me, and I've noticed this as I go out for the VA, I'll go to some event to try to make connections, is there are a fair number of people now, you talk about the online world, they only live in the online world. And they spend all their time commenting on other people's pictures on LinkedIn or Facebook. Sorry, it says my internet connection is jumpy. I apologize. Who knows? But to me, the networking has to have a real human component to it. I don't think you can just do it online constantly. I think it's very shallow.
Yes, it can be. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. It has to have a human approach in terms of really getting to know people beyond that. These are supposed to be your friends or your colleagues or what. Well, how did you really learn people? You spent time with them, you listened to what they had to say. And it's so important that we do that instead of just saying, here's my link, or hit me up on whatever. I don't know. And that doesn't work for me. And maybe I'm saying maybe because I am a baby boomer, but I think it goes, to your point, it goes deeper than that. I try to find similarities.
True.
It goes deeper than that. So,
and I think that, and again, this really came home to me in China, but I knew it beforehand. If you're talking to someone and they get something positive out of it and it helps them, they're more likely to become a connection, a valuable, useful connection for you than sort of going in. I see some of the women at corporations, they feel they should just be aggressive and, state what I want. But, maybe being part of being a baby boomer is knowing there's two sides to things.
yeah.
And, you really need to spend a little time, maybe you could listen to and help someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And you never know, years later, that person may be grateful and introduce you to a phenomenal opportunity.
Exactly. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to, anything else you want to talk about? I want to talk about your current volunteer position that you have. It's so powerful, working at the Michael E. Becky VA Medical Center and raising funds for homeless veterans. If you could talk about that a little bit, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, I'm in the starting phase. I can't say that it's been without some frustration. But what I'm trying to do, and in fact, I met with a gentleman who lives right in this building who said to me he knows some people at a particular large oil company downtown that's moving its headquarters from California. So you know who I mean. Um, I'm hopeful what I've suggested to the chief, and it hasn't happened yet. I said to her, when I approach people directly, it's not going to be as powerful as if you were extending an invitation. I said, I think what needs to happen is we need to bring some of these people to 1700 Webster Street to see the homeless facility and see what the VA is doing.
Yes.
It's not going as quickly as I'd like. That may be a function of being part of the government.
Yes.
And the other thing is, I'm not the product that's being sold
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
sense, and there's not quite the sense of urgency. What I'm hoping is if we can get the first person from large Houston company to go to this shelter and see what's going on, then that will open the door to others. But I have to kind of encourage and motivate my colleagues, because this is a little different for them too.
Yes, for sure. For sure. If you haven't really been in that arena and working for a nonprofit or a governmental agency is quite different. It is quite different. And, that's all I'm going
Absolutely.
to say on that there. But what I do want you, we're winding up, and I really want you to go over anything that you want this audience to remember. Because we have a lot of women who would love to be entrepreneurs, who are business women. Being an entrepreneur can be a lonely, lonely place a lot of times, and you need a community. And anything that you feel that would be important to share, I would love to hear what you'd like to tell them.
Well, again, one of the other things which I didn't mention is when I lived in Connecticut, I also served, Hartford had a like an incubator for startups. And anytime there was an international startup, they would get me involved. But sometimes I would say the question of them is, why are you pursuing this business? This doesn't really make sense for this, that, the other. So I would say what's very important as knowing yourself, is asking yourself the question I asked myself every day the first couple of years: am I being realistic?
Mm.
Because there's what I saw, whether it was Israeli startups or American startups, it's a tough road to hoe. And if your concept isn't well thought through, you're not going to just. I remember there was a young man that was from Spain, and he had a concept, and this startup group had told him that he could go to Silicon Valley and get money. I said, I may not be that smart in technology, but you don't have proprietary technology. He said, you're right. I said, what you have is a service, and that's fine, but you're not going to get funding from them for a service. Your model is more like this. So I would say, and what's realistic for the market and for you, whoever you are. And also, I would say, be agile. I didn't describe how my business evolved, but you have to kind of respond to the market, to yourself, what's going on. And I would lastly say, with the agility, that's demonstrative of resilience. And hopefully I'll be able to go the long game.
I love it. I love it. Felicia, thank you so much for coming today. You have so much information and so much knowledge and experience, and it has just been our pleasure having you here today. And thank you so,
Thank you
so
so
much.
much. I appreciate it, enjoyed it. Bless you.
Thank you. Bless you as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for joining us today on Passion and Purpose. It's been wonderful to connect with you, and I hope you found our conversation as enlightening and inspiring as I have. A huge thanks to our guests who contributed to the discussion and shared their experiences and insights. Your stories are the heartbeat of this podcast, and it's a joy to explore our passions and purpose together. I'm Pamela, reminding you to live with passion and purpose. Until next time, take care and keep reaching for your dreams.